Hello, welcome back to the Narconon and Scientology Chronicles. I'm Lucas Catton, and today we are going to talk about the disappearance of Narconon International. Now, Narconon International's job was sort of like the buffer between, or the second buffer between Church of Scientology and Narconon, which claimed to be secular, non-religious. But it used the works of L. Ron Hubbard. So ABLE is the Association for Better Living and Education, and it is staffed by Scientology Sea Org workers, like the billion-year contract people. You can only work at ABLE if you're in the Sea Org. So they are religious staff. So Narconon International is below that, or was below that, and they were regular paid staff, still almost entirely Scientologists, but not in the Sea Org, and they managed all the Narconon centers. And in my previous career with Narconon back then, I had a lot of interaction with Narconon International. As the president of Arrowhead, I did a lot of things with them, spokesperson roles and things like that. We'd make trips to DC. We talked about some of these things. You can go back and watch some of the other videos about some of those things. Well, so I became very familiar and very comfortable with a lot of people at Narconon International, and made a lot of trips out to Los Angeles throughout my years when I worked there, and then even some afterwards, where I was still like a supporter for a little while, with a field staff member, which I talked about in the previous one, and then I wasn't, and then I wasn't anything 10 years ago. So I'm going to start this. So back in 2006, I had just finished my staff contract at Narconon Arrowhead, and I was starting to do other things as a field staff member, which is like a paid volunteer. I say volunteer. It was like a paid referral source and things like that, where that's, go back and look at the Narconon field staff member video where it talks about how that is now a violation of federal policy. But that's what I had become. So in 2006, I finished my contract at Narconon Arrowhead, and I had made a trip out to Los Angeles. And I went to Narconon National, and their address at the time was still 7060 Hollywood Boulevard, which is directly across the street from the ABLE building, which is 7065 Hollywood Boulevard. And they rented a few suites and a floor of sort of a partially rundown office building directly across the street from ABLE. It wasn't that nice of an office. They never splurged there by any means, but nonetheless was in and out there. And in my time where I had stepped down from president and was forced to do work there, I scrubbed blinds, I scrubbed the walls, I painted whatever things or things like that. Whatever I did minor work as part of my punishment for not wanting to be president anymore. So fast forward, here it is, 2006. I'm no longer on staff. I'm out there. Their office is still there, 7060 Hollywood Boulevard. Go forward 5 more years, and I am 1 foot completely out and 1 toe left still in. And I was in the middle of making a DVD. It was called Curing Addiction, and I was really starting to explore all the other parts of sort of like an alternative or non-traditional treatment style that was out there and available back in 2011. And so I was traveling around the country and interviewing different people. Some of the people I interviewed were affiliated with Narconon back then. And so they had moved their office to 4652 Hollywood Boulevard. So this is July of 2011, 4652 Hollywood Boulevard. And that was just about a block and a half away from Scientology's packed base, like L. Ron Hubbard Way, where the Big Blue is, all that stuff. So they're actually closer to the rest of Scientology complex, but further away from ABLE. And that complex is like Vermont and Sunset. And so we crossed just over Vermont, and where Hollywood Boulevard is about to intersect with Sunset because it tapers off there. Anyways, so I had interviewed Clark Carr in his office there back then for that video. Clark Carr was the president of Narconon International for a long time. And they're like, hey, what are you doing? Are you in trouble? Clark even said, we thought we lost you to the dark side. Like, that's how they would say, like, You know, you're either part of the Jedi, like Scientology, or you're part of the dark side, you're like with, you know, Darth Vader and stuff, right? So he said, "Oh, I thought we lost you to the dark side." I'm like, you know, whatever. I was still there. So even though I was off in this other direction and had gone down this whole other road, which I talk about in the How I Became an SP video, you can watch that if you care to. So 2011, they're in a different location, but they're closer to the PAC base. And let's fast forward again. Now 5 more years, 2016. So in a span of 10 years here, from 2006 to 2016, they're now in their 3rd location. This location is 7065 Hollywood Boulevard. But wait, that's the Able building. That's where it's listed today too. If you go on narconon.org and you look for Narconon International's address, it lists 7065 Hollywood Boulevard, which is the Able building. And it switched over there by 2016 on their website officially. Kind of curious there. What happened? I wonder. Well, for one thing, Scientology, they bought Larry Hagman's old estate and opened Narconon Ojai. And at the end of 2015, Able took over and disbanded Narconon International. They completely disbanded it. And they made all the Narconon staff who were at Narconon International either leave and go get other jobs, or they offered them jobs at Narconon centers, at individual centers, or they just told them to take a hike, you know? And that center opened, Narconon Ojai opened, and there was a grand opening in September of 2015. So that's when this big shift really started to take place. Able stepped in. They started trying to force Narconon centers to turn over their websites. They changed up parts of the program and released all new materials. They started to force staff to wear uniforms like Sea Org workers. And now if you look at all the websites look the same. Their uniforms are supposed to look the same. They're trying to turn them into like Sea Org looking staff. And that whole evolution that occurred then was post all of the huge fallout from the deaths and all the multiple lawsuits and just horrible press and everything. So Able stepped in and said, "We're going to take over." Amidst that takeover attempt, you had other Narconon centers leave the network because they're like, "You're not stealing our, what we do," and they became something else and totally left. So there was some Civil War type stuff there as well around that time, and then it started to continue to evolve or go downhill actually. And I did an interview with Aaron Smith Levin about the field staff member commissions and how they're illegal now. It's a federal law against paying those commissions, and we talked about why there would be no more Narconon International, why Able would take over, and a lot of it comes down to that control factor. In fact, probably 50% of it was the control factor that Scientology needed to control it, and that things had become such a mess that they stepped in and took over. But the other thing is from the financial side, because all of the Narconon centers around the world would pay 10% of their corrected gross income, which is not the same as net income, but it's not as high as gross income either. They call it corrected gross income. They pay 10% of that for license fees to Narconon International. Narconon International would then pay their staff and have their operating costs and then pay 10% of their revenue to Able International. Well, with Narconon International now totally controlled by Able, they get all 10% of that directly, and they cut out the middleman, Narconon International. They just get that money directly. So like, hey, great, we'll just take all this. However, there's a couple things here. One, if you look at their 990 forms, their IRS 990 forms online, their income plummeted, like majorly plummeted. And I'll give you an example. In 2012, which was basically the best income year for Narconon in the United States, Narconon International had $8.4 million in revenue. So that is revenue that they generated themselves plus 10% of whatever they, or plus 10% of the corrected gross income from all of the Narconon centers around the world. About 60 million of which came from the United States, maybe about 20 million from other parts of the world, and that was their income, 8.4 million that year. Curiously, they had 14.7 million in expenses. Now, a lot of that came from the lawsuit settlements, where Narconon International had to step in and help pay out some of the settlements in some of these cases, like Narconon Georgia, Narconon Arrowhead, etc. And that was when really things for them crossed, income-wise and all that kind of stuff. And so go a few years later, Able has taken over by now. And in 2018, the last form on file, the last 990 form on file, shows that they had a revenue of 2.6 million. And they had 2.7 million in expenses. So they're still operating at a loss of roughly $100,000 per year as a loss. But that still means that back then, the Narconon network as a whole generated about $26 million in revenue. And then, 2.6 of that went directly to Narconon International, i.e. Able. And yet they still claim to be secular. They claim that Narconon International is a secular organization, that Narconon centers are. But on these 990 forms, if you take a look at them, in the previous years, it lists the actual corporate officers and their pay. Like you have to list your top paid employees. So in previous years, you had people like Phil Hart, who was the executive director, Clark Card, who was the president, Claudia Arcabascio, who was, I think, like a legal director and stuff. You had Pete Van Auken, who was the financial director. You had other people like Sue Birkinshaw, Yarko Manzanares, other people on there, and it would list their income. And they still didn't make much money, especially not for California fees. But they're, in most of those years, they'd make somewhere between, let's say, $40,000 and $75,000, which really is not a lot of money for Los Angeles at all. They were living on really slim wages. But nonetheless, they were getting paid regular, normal wages, and they were not Sea Org members. Go back to that 2018 990 form where they made a lot less money, 2.6 million. But their highest paid officers were paid between $4,000 and $7,000 for the year. For the year. Because they're Sea Org workers. Danielle Blasco, Howie Gutfeld, Wayne Carnahan, and Marty Toffel. I met Howie and Marty several times, so I know that for a fact that they are Sea Org workers and able. I don't know Danielle or Wayne, or if they're even still in it or not, but it'd be interesting if they are. I'll probably do a little bit more research, but I kind of stopped there on that to see if they still are there or what the roles are, et cetera. But between $4,000 and $7,000 total for the year is now what they're paying Narconon International employees, because it is not a Narconon International. It's Able. It's Able running Narconon International. It's a total lie. It's a sham. They are not separate from the church at all. In fact, if you go back to when this shift occurred, when Narconon Ojai opened, on Scientology.org, it shows these beautiful pictures of Narconon Ojai opening. And of the 5 people who were yanking the ribbon for the opening, 3 of them were Narconon International staff. One of them was the executive director for Able, and one of them was Kelly Preston. Now, very sadly, 2 of those 5 have now passed away from cancer, Kelly Preston and Sue Birkinshaw. I did a previous video on Sue Birkinshaw as well. So I can't believe that they're even attempting to still have some kind of veil of separation, because there is none. It's very clearly present in their IRS filings. There is no separation. It is a Scientology organization. Now, as, for example, Tony Ortega recently reported, and we talked about before too, major news with the closing of the Fresh Start programs too. So now they're down to only 5 treatment centers in the United States. Narconon Ojai in California, which is a 6-bed facility, like a celebrity type place, 6-bed facility. You've got Narconon Colorado. You have Narconon Arrowhead in Oklahoma. Narconon New Life Center in Louisiana, and Narconon Suncoast in Florida. There's only 5 centers left. 3 of those 5 properties are owned by Scientology. Ojai, Arrowhead, and Suncoast. The money came from Scientology directly for that, whether through the International Association of Scientologists or money given from one company down to like one Scientology arm down to Able, down to their Social Betterment Properties Holdings Incorporated that they set up that owned Arrowhead for, I'm assuming they still do, but same thing with Ojai, and same thing with Suncoast. Those are Scientology-owned properties. So that means there's only actually 2 Narconon centers left in the country not directly owned by Scientology. Colorado, whose executive director and founder is Glenn Picavage. He's a Scientologist chiropractor, and then Louisiana, which is owned by Rohit Adi, who's a Scientologist doctor, and Kathy Steiner, who's a longtime, highly dedicated Scientologist. So that's all we have left. So the veil of there being any separation continues to erode. what thinness there was to begin with, and keep in mind all these years where they denied it in these lawsuits and denied it in in the public and denied it in the news and all this kind of stuff where they said no, we're not Scientology. They can't even do that anymore. They can't even pretend. There is no Narconon International. There is no buffer in between. There's nothing preventing that direct control of every action in Narconon by Scientology. Directly. It's all there for you to look at. Take a look at yourself. You can go to ProRepublica and take a look at these 990 forms, or you can go on IRS and other places as well and take a look at the 990 forms. You go on archive.org and go back through the Wayback Machine and take a look at all the different iterations of narconon.org and the website and the different years where I pulled up, and you can see exactly when they listed and changed those addresses. All this stuff is readily available for anyone to see. You can find out, that these new staff, what they're getting paid, that they are able employees, they are Sea Org members. All this stuff is there for you to check out if you care to. Or you don't have to. You can take my word for it because I've just been studying all this to put this video together. But there you go. That's what I got. That's the story. That's the amazing disappearance of Narconon International. How it went from, making millions and millions of dollars running all these centers down to being non-existent. And, who knows where some of these people are today? I don't know where Yarko is. I don't know where Claudia is. Clark Carr, last I saw, it was listed as working for the Earth Organization, which is also a Scientology-run company. I don't know where Phil Hart went. I don't know if he's still alive. Sue Birkinshaw passed away. I don't know. Bobby Wiggins, I think he's still doing IAS fundraisers. There's just continues to be less and less. And this is the picture that is Scientology as a whole. Go online and things look glitzy and glamorous, but in reality, it's all eroding. It's all going away. And it's there plainly for anyone to see. So if you have any questions, please shoot me a note, comment on the video, and I'll do my best to answer them. Thank you for those who are commenting. I'll be happy to provide any other clarification, that kind of thing. And also, if you have some other questions that you'd like videos to be done on regarding Narconon and Scientology, if I had any personal experience with any of that, I'll be happy to do some videos on that. And in the meantime, take care.